Good morning and welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Today we're working on our Miss Karen project and we're talking borders and how are we going to finish this project up as far as the front goes, and then our plans for quilting it. So join us right after this and I'll show you what I've got in mind. Hi and welcome back. We're working on Miss Karen and I've got it set up so you should be able to see on our overhead what our finished project looks like. What we're going to do is we're going to put a border around this project almost as if it were a frame. Now you can take this particular pattern and build a quilt off of it if you'd like, or if you would like an even bigger wall hanging project, you could do other things. And let's talk about that just a minute before we get into our borders. Let's say you love this, but you wanted it a little bit bigger, 50% bigger, 100% bigger, whatever. You could put a nice little border around it with similar type vines and leaves and flowers to create a border. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that Erin Russick does have some accompanying blocks that go with this. You could put blocks all around it if you wanted to. So many options. You could also put a border and then put the blocks on it. However you want to do it, it's your project. So we're going to take this and we're just going to put a frame on it so it looks similar to the Miss Karen that we have here. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I think I've got this camera set up big enough that you can see. If we're going for 22 inches, we need to put, yes we can do 22. So 22 is going to put, if we put 11 inches in the center of our center here, see how that is? And then we can mark 22. And we're just going to put a little dot. And then we're going to do that all the way around, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to cut a square 22 inches. So we're measuring 11 inches from the center out on each side. However you choose to do that. I don't think I got that one quite straight. Let's try that one again. 11 in the center. Okay. Because if you measure out and you're at a wide angle, your measurement is not going to be correct. I want to try to get that pretty close over here. All right, that should be all four corners. Now, what we're going to do at this point is we're just going to square up those corners with the biggest square we have. And I'm going to take my time and do that. Now, what I've decided for the borders is I'm going to go with this dragonfly fabric. I thought of all the fabrics we used on this, this was the cutest of all of them. So this is going to be our border. And then to give it just a little extra interest, we are also going to put a secondary inner border on with just a little bit of a reveal. So we're going to have this lighter, almost linen texture. I love the texture on that. That's why we're going with that one. So this is going to be where the 22 inches is. And that's 22 inches from one side to the other. 11 inches here. And then we're going to have this dark border Probably this will be about 1/2 inch. Let's see where we are. Almost stayed on it. And then the border here. Now the question is, how much border can we put there? Because this one had a nice wide border. It was almost 4 inches. So 22 and 4 is 26 and 4 is 30. That's going to put us almost at the same size. I would actually love that because I think they would be beautiful hanging on a wall together. They're similar, but they're not the same, and I think it's interesting to see how you can use the same technique and get two things that are just completely different. So we're going with a 1/2 inch exposed inner border and a, let's say, 4 inch finished outer border. So let's get started first on our inner border. We're going to, we don't want to mess up all of our ironing, so we're just going to lightly fold that and put it over there. 1/2 inch border means it needs to be at least 1 inch in a cut manner. So we're going to do that. And we're going to start out with just a cut to get everything square. And I'm going to use that printed line on the selvage to be my square. And cut. Here we go. Okay, now we've got a nice square line, and we want it to be 1/2 inch, so it needs to be at least 1 inch. I'm going to cut it 1.5 inches. Because we're going to need 4 strips. There's 1. Okay. And then we've got a little issue here because this little strip is on our scrap, so we're just going to cut that off and refold and go back in and cut again at 1.5 inches. I'd love to do mitered corners on this. We're going to see how many strips we have before we make that decision and how long they are. Okay, so these are well over 22 inches long, and we're going to need an extra 1.5 inches on each side, so that's 25 inches. We've got enough. So we should be able to have 2 a little bit shorter pieces and 2 a little bit longer pieces. So this is going to do great for our inner border. That should be plenty for that. Okay, so that's extra fabric. We're going to hold on to that just in case we need it. And then let's talk about the border fabric. Now this should be 44 inches wide, which is plenty for the length of our finished product. So we're going to have 22 inches plus 1 inch on each side. Now we're at 23, and then we want a 4 inch. So that's going to be 23, 27, 31. So we have plenty of fabric. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to start out by cutting a square edge. We're going to line up with that printed line on the selvage. Oops, I got way off there. Okay, toss that. So then how much do we have? We're going to need at least 4. And we do 4 16 inches. We've got well over 16 inches here. So we're just going to do, we want 4 finished. So we need the 1/2 inch and the 1/4 inch and the extra. So we're going to cut 5-inch strips. Do we have enough? I think we do. So we're going to cut right at 5 inches, and that's a little tricky here. Green board, green fabric. Hard to see. 5-inch strips. Now, the one thing I'll tell you about this fabric is the dragonflies are flying in all directions, so it's not a directional fabric. We're going to be able to get away with having them flying upside down. Okay, that's 4. And 5. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to stitch these pieces together. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch the light color border onto the darker color border. And I'm going to take one of these squares and line it up. And let me tell you why I'm doing that. I would like to do the mitered borders on this, but I have a limited amount of the lighter green fabric. I didn't check to see if that one was still in stock. So I'm going to position this so that I start the lighter green fabrics 45 degrees inside the fabric strip I have. And then that way I'm not wasting this inner border fabric up here where I know I won't use it. So we're going to get started with that. I need to swap out the thread in my machine, and we'll get started and see just how far we go. Too many strips here. Seam allowance. And then we're going to start right there. And as I'm sewing these, I'm going to kind of look at where they might be positioned on this, because we're actually going to need all of them the same. And that tells me that I've got this pinned from the wrong end. What I need to do is I need to pin from this end because I sew this way. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but what you're doing is you're constructing it in your head to try to determine if this is the way it needs to be positioned for you, and then how you would use that on the finished product. And I'm going to clip off that selvage. And then I'm going to sew that right on. All right, I've got my machine set up now. I've got some dark green thread in the top and some dark gray thread in the bottom, which I think are going to blend together and give us a nice invisible thread for this. And we're going to start down. Now my guess is this is probably down about 5 inches, which is the width of the border. We're setting this on a 1/4 inch seam distance, so we can use our 1/4 inch foot, so we keep all this really nice and straight. And we're just going to stitch down, and I've got it set on a 2.4. If you're interested in learning more about stitch lengths, check out a video that we either already have on our channel or we will have soon that talks about what stitch lengths really look like. Okay, we're going to do that 4 more times, but you can see what that's going to look like. And then once it's folded under, it gives us a nice little depth in that border. All right, we're going to do the other 4, and then we're going to kind of put it all together. And I think what we'll do is we'll come back as we begin to get all these pieces together and review a little bit about how we squared up the original center of our picture, and then how we are going to miter the corners, because mitering the corners is something that shows real popularity on the channel. I think a lot of people are interested in doing it, and it's just difficult enough that a refresher video every now and then is very nice to see. Right now we're working on squaring up our design, put the borders on, and I have taken the largest square that I have, and I put some Scotch tape on the top of the square and marked the pieces of my design that are consistent, so we can kind of look at where we are when we move it to another corner. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a dot right here to show that's the center. And I'm only using my Sharpie to mark on the tape so that I can pull it off when we're done, and I've not done anything to damage my marker. So I have taken this and put the 11 inch from the outside here and the 11 inch from here. Okay, so we've got the center marked here, the outside, and then the 2 little buds are marked. And we can now see that our little blue mark is right here and right here. So I think we're in really good place to do this. And I'm going to put just a little mark here and here. These pins have come off really good. They do take a couple of times to get them off, but I've not had any problem with getting them off. And I'm just going to go ahead and draw everything from the center to the point very lightly. I'm not going to allow a lot of ink to get on it, but as you can see, I have a full line there. And then I'm going to shift this around, And we have our square here where we've marked where the center is. And we've marked about where our buds are. And we're going to look to see where our mark here is and where our line here. And I'm going to take just a regular straight edge and see where that is going to take me. That should take me to right there. So we'll do the square now. Because these marks on the square are going to be just kind of guidelines, because not all of those pieces were put exactly in the same position that the other ones were. So there could be a little bit of a discrepancy between one corner and another. All right, we've got this line matched up. We've got our positioning pretty close. Looking for my little blue dot over there. There it is. Okay, I think that's going to do it. Be sure not to grab the wrong marker, because a Sharpie marker is going to mean that we're going to a different size pattern. Okay, so 2 corners done. I am doing a little bit more marking for the edges of this than I did before, and I think that's just going to help us be able to do it more efficiently. Lining up the center. We want to make sure we get this one lined up. And there's our dot, and there's our line. Okay. And as we go, we've got a little bit more confidence that everything is working as it should. And we can just keep on going. And we should be able to get all of these marks out. I noticed our pressing is holding pretty well. And this one we should be able to just line up these 2 lines as our starting point. Now you see these are way off. Those are a little bit off, but our center is still in our center. So I think we're okay. When I say way off, 1/4 of an inch. Now let's look. I'm looking at our threads, and it looks like our threads are lining up this way really, really nicely. This way, we've got a little bit of pull to the fabric. They don't sit exactly right. But what I will share with you is I left the selvage on this edge right here. And let's see how close we are with that selvage. We're pretty close. We're within 1/8 of an inch. And it looks like, as far as the really deep weave in the selvage, we're almost on the money. So we're in really good shape. Everything is pretty square. There's a little bit of a tilt to the weaving, but we are good. So we've got a great spot now here where to start. And I think that the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to draw another line 1/2 inch out, because I cut that inner border at 1.5 inches. I used a 1/4 inch on the seam from the light border to the dark border. So that puts us at 1 1/4 inches. And I really wanted about a 1/2 inch. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to, maybe I should put it at 3/4 inch. That's a really generous seam allowance. But that would get me what I wanted as far as the size of that. So now I'm going to draw a line at 3/4 inch all the way around, and that will be where we place the edge of our inner border fabric and sew. So let's get started now. We've got our double border pinned on to our main star of our program here, and I have trimmed this area of the top up at that outside line we just drew. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew from right here at where that inner line is all the way down using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now I'm going to come in here and set my little magnetic seam guide right at 1/2 inch. And I'm going to be just a smidgen generous with that. Okay. And we're going to get started sewing. Now we're going to sew, like I said, right from that inner line that we drew all the way down to the next inner line. And I am only going to put a 1 stitch back stitch on here because we're going to come back in a few minutes and do the miter, and we may need to adjust it just slightly if we haven't really hit our mark. So just 1 and then a back stitch. Which really ends up being 2. Okay, we are set on a straight stitch right down the middle, and it's set on 2.4. So that's going to give us just a standard size stitch. And here we go. And I'm going to stop just a minute. I want to tell you 2 things. First of all, I've got my hand up here, and it looks like I'm pulling. I've just pulled it up enough to grab a hold of it. I'm just trying to keep it lined up on the edge of that magnetic seam guide so that we keep a really consistent seam all the way through. I'm not pulling on it. And I'm going to mark this on that inner box line. Because I want to stop as close to that as I can. And I'm just going to 1 stitch back. Okay, so we've stitched that down. Here you can see this is where the 2 pieces are stitched together, and there's our stitch line right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over on this side and trim this rest of this up. And I'm doing this with the scissors instead of the rotary cutter because it's so easy to have that rotary cutter go off of the line you're trying to cut and cut way more than you need. And we've got a finished project there, so we don't want to do that. Okay, let's put this in the trash. And then what we're going to do, here we are right here at the corner. And you see we're actually a little bit wider than our box. We're about 1/4 of an inch wider. So we're going to work with that. And we're going to put this next piece so that those 2 inner boxes will come together here. That's the most important thing, is that we have enough of that. And then we should be able to pin and go. We're just going to put a placement pin down here. And then we're going to pin this section. And it looks like we've got quite a bit more. So I think maybe what we're going to do is pull it on down. So we're not wasting so much. We'll have a bigger piece to work with as our scrap than a smaller piece. And I do try to use my scraps here as efficiently as possible. Okay, we're going to pull this piece down and out of the way. And then we're going to pin this so that we're sewing just about to that same marker. And what we'll do is we'll put 2 pins in here. And the mark we want to stop in is right between that. Okay, we've got all that lined up. And we just need a little mark at the end to tell us where to start. And you know, we start out shooting for that inner box, but as we noticed, that's not where our seam is going. So I'm going to stitch a little bit outside of that. Our seam guide is all set up still. Let's get this straightened out. Okay. We're on that same seam allowance because we want to be consistent. We want to make sure we don't catch the other fabric in with what we're sewing. and not too much of a back stitch because we don't want to create a lot of stitches we have to take out if we don't have it right. So let's see where we are and what needs to happen next. Okay, we have 2 pieces of our border sewed onto our top. And we want to make sure that it sits this way so that our fabric is under our border, our darker border. Now, the first thing I noticed, and I'm sure you do too, is that our seam doesn't seem to be even with our block. So let's look at our fabric here. It's 1/2 inch, it's 1/2 inch. It's 1/2 inch. So either we were a little bit off on the trimming, and we can go in and look at that. Our line is right there where we cut. So I'm not sure what caused that. And let's look at how much it really is. It looks like we're a little narrow up here. We're not even 1/4 of an inch. And then down here we're right at 1/4 of an inch. So I think we may try to leave it. Let's look at what we've got here for our corner. Okay, it looks like this one is not sewn all the way to the meeting point. It looks like we've got a little bit of the same thing going here. But it does look like it will meet up very nicely there, which is quite a relief because that's really what's important. And let's look at one other thing, and that is the width of this. And it looks like this is pretty close to 3/4 of an inch. In most directions. It might be a little bit shy on this side. It's on the money here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this flap and fold it up. We know where they meet here. So what we can do is we can place this. Let's see if we have this on camera correctly. We do. The chalk is Taylor's chalk and it will come off. So I've got the diagonal line lined up down here on the edge of the fabric, and this comes right along so that where it crosses the top is where they meet. Okay. So that's going to be our seam line. And then if we take it over, if we say this is 1/2 inch, this is 1/2 inch. I'm going to go in 1/2 inch from there. And do another line. I did that one a little darker. So what we can do we're going to be really brave. We're going to go ahead and cut that on that line that's 1/2 inch away from where we want our seam line to be. We'll put that over there. And we're going to pull this one down. And we're just going to make a little fake crease in this. So we can kind of see that a little better. All right. Then we're going to use this again. See if we have enough room. And we're going to lay this on the edge of the fabric with this diagonal line right on this edge of the fabric. We're going to pull it down to where they meet, which should be right there. And I'm kind of pressing this chalk up into that corner. And we'll do the same thing again where I come in and draw another line 1/2 inch away. And we'll make that one darker again. And we just make it darker by pressing harder a couple more times. And we're going to go ahead and cut that as well. If this is your first time doing a mitered border, I'd recommend that you check out some of my other videos on mitered borders. They go into a little bit more detail, a little more fitting instructions, and if you've never done it before, that could be to your advantage. Okay, we're going to make sure that that's marked. Then we're going to pull this one over, just like this. And now we should have both pieces cut so that they match here. Their seams match, and then they're going to come out right at that point. And I'm going to clip back the point of our design fabric there, and we're going to give it just a little bit of a clip right in the middle. We're trying not to come anywhere close to the edge of the fabric. Excuse me, the edge of where it's sewn onto the border fabric. I'm going to clip it just a little bit more. All right, there we go. So now we have this. And I'm going to take my time and make sure it's lined up correctly. And I'm going to take it back a little bit further. And I'm going to feel in here and see if our seams are lining up. You can feel that they're really thick there. And then we're going to do some pinning, because we want those to stay together. It'll help us tremendously if we don't have to worry with those shifting. Okay, and these edges are lined up. That keeps our angle in place. Now, a couple of things about where we're going to sew. It is a bias cut. So that means that if you stretch it when you sew, you're going to get waves. That edge is going to get thinner and longer than the inside of the fabric, and you're going to have those waves. So we really don't want that to happen. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this fabric up at the end. So that when we sew, I want to make sure that you can see that, we're going to sew this way. And we're going to stop there at that seam. Now our guide is set at 1/2 inch, and what we're going to do is we're going to push it just ever so slightly so that the needle comes down just over 1/2 inch. And when I say just over, I mean the difference between on that line and on the white part next to the line. And now we're going to sew. And I recommend that you start from the center and sew out. Again, do not stretch that fabric at all. Do not pull it, do not tug it. And if there's any extra fabric, try to get the edge of where it needs to be in place. And here, because I cut that kind of at an angle coming up, I've got a little extra fabric. I just kind of folded it up. So we should be able to come right down on that seam line. I took a little picture that shows what this looks like, so we will insert that so you can see. And now we're going to sew. And I'm just going to sew really slow so that I can make sure that I'm almost kind of pushing that fabric up in there just a little bit, so we get a nice even seam right where we want it. And just a little bit of a back stitch. And let's see what it looks like. All of our pins out. Now it still needs to be pressed, so let's keep that in mind. Some extra tools under there. And we will need to trim that seam allowance up as well. So I think now as soon as we get that pressed and seams trimmed, whoops, there's another pin. It won't lay flat if it's still pinned up, will it? Okay, there we are. Now you can see that once we trim up and we press, we've got a nice seam there. See, here's what's going on here on this back side. We've got all this fabric all wanting to go in different directions. And it forms a little bit of a lump there. Oh, much better. And I may use a little bit of applique glue when I get ready to trim that and put it in place, just so that it holds it until we're able to stitch it with our quilting. But there is our mitered corner. I'm going to see if I can't bring you in for a little closer look. Now, of course, I'm going to want to remove this blue line before I press, just to ensure that it doesn't get permanently ingrained in that. But that is the very simple way to do a mitered corner. If you wanted to do something more entailed, so you were matching up designs, or you wanting to be super persnickety about your corners and your seams, then you could do that. But I think that for that amount of effort, we have created a really nice mitered corner. And as we stitch that in place, we're going to be able to take any little minor matches and fix it. But it's really good. It's got a little tiny spot right there, but I think even as close as the camera above is to this, you really don't even see it. Okay, so there's a little quick lesson on our mitered corners for this project, and I want to hold this up a bit so you can get an idea of what this is going to look like when we put the border around all 3 sides. We've got 2 of the sides sewn on. We have 3 more corners to do. I'm not going to do that here with you today because it is a bit time consuming and we've already covered a lot on this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my border on, do all my miters, get rid of my blue lines, and then give it a really good press and trim up the seam allowances. And next time when we come back for this video, we're going to be covering the sandwiching and loading it onto our Grace Easy 3 frame. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe. Consider being a member if that's something you're interested in. And we'll see you next week at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Bye.